Mike Sullivan is officially out as the Pittsburgh Penguins head coach. Find out why he's now my top option for the Chicago Blackhawks.
You're Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, Blackhawks fans? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Jack Bushman. Just wanted to say thank you real quick to everyone for making Locked On Blackhawks your very first listen here to start off your week. Make sure to go and hit that like button. Hop in the comment section below. Let me know who you want me to cover next on my Chicago Blackhawks season recaps. And also go and subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube, all of which is 100% free, won't cost you anything, and helps me out in a massive way in growing my platform. And one final shout out that I got to give today as well goes out to today's sponsor, which is Amazon Fire TV Stick 4K. You can now turn any TV into your Xbox. No console needed. Just head on over to Amazon.com/Fire TV Locked On to learn more today. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Again, thank you all for joining me on another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, your one-stop shop for all things Chicago Blackhawks. It's crazy how fast things can change, Blackhawks fans, because literally just yesterday when I was diving through David Carl, unfortunately withdrawing his name from the Blackhawks coaching search. Make sure to go and check out that episode, by the way, if you haven't done so already. But in that show, I mentioned the Pittsburgh Penguins were reportedly keeping on Mike Sullivan as their head coach. At least it sure seemed that way based on general manager Kyle Dubas's exit interview. Sullivan himself, during his own interview, said his intentions are to remain the head coach of the Penguins. But things can change in this league in an instant, as just a couple of hours ago, news broke that the Pens officially fired the two-time Stanley Cup champion head coach after spending 10 years in that position, which now I believe firmly changes everything for our Chicago Blackhawks because, like I said yesterday, Carl and Sullivan were my top two candidates, and with both of them seeming like they were off the table, it kind of muddy things a bit for the Blackhawks in their coaching search. While I do like Jay Woodcroft and I do like Todd Nelson, we'll see what happens with Rick Tocchet. I actually had someone in my comment section also bring up Gerard Gallant, who I admittedly forgotten about, although there's not a ton of buzz around his name at this point in time. But Mike Sullivan is, in my opinion, pretty clearly a tier above all of those guys, and I think he should immediately become the number one target for the Hawks right here, right now, because going through Mike Sullivan's coaching history, his resume kind of speaks for itself. He first got a head coaching job way back in the NHL back in 2003, 2004 with the Boston Bruins, basically right after retiring from a player in the NHL. He actually began with the Providence Bruins the year before, their minor league affiliate, and got off to an outstanding start to his coaching career. The Providence Bruins went 41-17, 9-4 in that season with Sullivan as their head coach, leading to him getting promoted to the big leagues the following year. And in his first season with the Bruins, they were first place in their division, qualified for the Stanley Cup playoffs. Unfortunately, the NHL lockout hit in 2004 that next year, and the Bruins really struggled in that first year out of the lockout. And then the organization elected to kind of randomly fire Mike Sullivan after just 2 years as their bench boss. He went on to become an assistant coach for the Tampa Bay Lightning, the New York Rangers, and the Vancouver Canucks before getting an AHL head coaching job for the Penguins minor league affiliate Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins. His first year with them, they got off to an incredible start. I believe they were like 18-5 or something like that. While up in the big leagues, Dan Bylsma was fired as the head coach. Mike Sullivan goes on to be his replacement, and the rest is history. The Penguins go on to win the Stanley Cup that same season, go on to repeat again in 2017, and Sullivan went on to become the winningest head coach in Pittsburgh Penguins franchise history, amassing an impressive 409, 255, and 89 record in 10 seasons there. He's also the only head coach in NHL history as an American to win multiple Stanley Cups. The Penguins also qualified for the playoffs in each of Sullivan's first 7 years with the organization. And while they did miss out on the playoffs each of the last 3 years, it's kind of an aging core, which us Blackhawks fans are a little familiar with. And they've kind of kicked the can down the street a little bit on this rebuild. I don't think you can really say Mike Sullivan is the one to blame for the Penguins not reaching the Stanley Cup playoffs these last few years. And even with that being the case, this was Sullivan's first year since his second year in the NHL as a head coach. That season I talked about with the Bruins a moment ago after the NHL lockout. This year with the Penguins and that second year with the Bruins are the only 2 seasons in 12 years as an NHL head coach in which Mike Sullivan's teams had more regulation losses than they did wins in the regular season. So he's done a lot of winning in his NHL career. He's also represented the United States as a head coach on the international scene many times, most recently for Team USA at the Four Nations Face-Off. And I haven't mentioned yet, he does have some Blackhawks ties as well. It was a little over a decade ago now, but after he was fired as an assistant coach for the Vancouver Canucks in 2014, Sullivan joined on with the Blackhawks for the 2014-15 season as a player development coach, and they, of course, went on to win the Stanley Cup. That's what led to him getting the job with the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins before joining on with Pittsburgh. So he does have some Chicago Blackhawks ties. He's also a former NHL player in his own right, which I think is a really crucial perspective to keep in mind in terms of the locker room dynamic. He's done a lot of winning, as I just outlined. He's also familiar with a Connor Bedard-like hype train in Sidney Crosby with the Pens, although obviously when he was with Pittsburgh, Crosby was at a little bit different of a stage of his career than what Bedsy is facing right here, right now. But obviously lots of reasons for the Blackhawks to be pursuing Mike Sullivan with a purpose. And for the same reasons that I outlined with David Carl. And it's kind of funny because since the news broke about David Carl withdrawing his name from the Blackhawks coaching search, I've had some people in my comment sections who were like, you told us that you had a source that the Blackhawks were going to hire David Carl as their next coach. No, I never said that. There were just a lot of reasons to make it seem like they were a match made in heaven. And because of all of those reasons, I truly did believe David Carl was going to be the next head coach of the Hawks, but sometimes these things happen. It's not like my source that I didn't have lied to you guys or anything. There were a lot of people who thought David Carl was going to be the next head coach of the Blackhawks. And listen, I don't have a source telling me that Mike Sullivan is going to be the next coach either, but for the same reasons that I outlined with Carl, basically, like this should be a pretty intriguing fit for Mike Sullivan. Obviously, the Blackhawks, I know I'll probably get some grief for this, but it's true. They are an Original Six organization, an illustrious franchise in a great sports city with a very passionate fan base. It's a job that is very prestigious, and that is something to take note of. Also, the Blackhawks have a ton of money to go improve this roster moving forward. They also have a ton of money to give Mike Sullivan himself, Connor Bedard, in a stacked prospect pool that's going to have more first-round picks these next couple of drafts. And then also, like I said with David Carl, while there are some expectations to help get this ship going in the right direction, there's not that immediate pressure to go and contend for a Stanley Cup right here, right now, because we know it's still going to be a little bit of a process. The turnaround isn't going to be happening instantly, and Mike Sullivan would get an opportunity to build that really from the ground up with a lot of pieces that we're hoping are going to be crucial parts to this puzzle here in Chicago. So lots of reasons for Chicago to be intriguing to Mike Sullivan. However, one thing I definitely have to know, Blackhawks fans, there are going to be a lot of teams going after Mike Sullivan. I'm sure the Blackhawks aren't going to be the only ones making an aggressive pursuit, although I expect them to really do the same thing that they did with David Carl, like circle Mike Sullivan's name, give it their best effort to make sure that he's their guy, because again, I just think he's a clear tier ahead the rest of the free agent NHL head coaches right now. But a lot of other clubs are going to be feeling the same way. Probably none more important, though, than the Boston Bruins. Mike Sullivan has long Boston ties. Not only was it his first NHL head coaching gig way back in 2003, but he's also a Boston native. He grew up there, went to high school in Boston, went to Boston University. And one other thing is that Charlie McAvoy is his son-in-law, and he's obviously a penciled into the future of the Boston Bruins. So there are going to be a lot of things attracting to Mike Sullivan to Boston as well. And if I had to go and put like a gambling line out there as far as the most likely teams for Mike Sullivan to end up, I would have the Boston Bruins as the favorite, but right after them, I would have the Chicago Blackhawks because, again, I think this would be a really attractive situation for Mike Sullivan. He at least has a little bit of familiarity with the organization, even if it was 10 years ago. And also, I do think the Blackhawks are going to give him a good pitch as well, both financially and in terms of why it would make sense for him at this stage of his career. We'll see if they can out-pony the Boston Bruins. Like I mentioned, I think those are the two favorites at this point in time, but I really do believe Mike Sullivan, that's the guy the Blackhawks are circling at this point in time, and they're going to go and make an aggressive pursuit at him now that he's officially on the market after being fired by the Pittsburgh Penguins following 10 years as their head coach. There is the latest on Mike Sullivan and whether or not he could be the next head coach of the Chicago Blackhawks. I think interviews, I've said this a couple of times on the show, got to be starting here at some point, and we'll probably be hearing who the Blackhawks are interviewing. 100% Mike Sullivan has to be a part of that process. The Blackhawks got to go and make a good run at him because I think he's the top guy now out there on the market. But make sure to stick with me, Blackhawks fans, for segment 2 is coming up in just a moment. I'll dive into defenseman Alex Vlasic's 24-25 season recap. But first, I got to talk to you all real quick about Game Time. The Stanley Cup playoffs are here, and if you've never experienced a live NHL playoff game, it's unlike anything you've ever experienced before. The intensity, the speed, the energy in the building, it's truly next level. And thanks to Game Time, getting in the door is now easier and more affordable than ever. And Game Time is the fastest way for you to grab playoff tickets, especially for those must-see matchups, because prices actually drop as puck drop gets closer, and with last-minute deals, you can save up to 60% on your tickets. And here's what I personally love about Game Time. The app even shows you a panoramic view of your seats, so you know exactly what to expect before you arrive and also before you make your purchase. So go and take the guesswork out of buying playoff tickets with Game Time. All you got to do, download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNHL in all caps for $20 off on your first purchase. Again, that's code LOCKEDONNHL in all caps for $20 off. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed, Game Time. Segment 2, time to get into my next Chicago Blackhawks 24-25 season recap. And as a reminder, real quick, I kicked things off last week with none other than Mr. Connor Bedard. Make sure to go and check out that episode to see what grade I gave Bedard for his performance here this season. And also hop in the comment section below right now and let me know who you want to see me cover next on my Chicago Blackhawks season recaps. And I also forgot to throw this out there during segment 1. Make sure to let me know your thoughts on Mike Sullivan now hitting the NHL free agent head coaching market. Do you think he should be the number one guy that the Blackhawks target with David Carl out of the mix? If not, let me know who your top candidate is at this point in time. But for segment 2 here today in my next Blackhawks season recap, I'm going to be diving through 23-year-old defenseman Alex Vlasic's season. And Vlasic is going to be turning 24 here in just a couple of weeks' time, former second-round pick back in the 2019 NHL draft. But with him about to be 24, it's kind of funny. He's basically the old man of the future core on the blue line for the Blackhawks, considering he's older than Sam Rinzel, Artie Levshinov, Ethan Del Mastro, Wyatt Kaiser, Nolan Allen, Kevin Korchinski, right? Like he's got a couple of years on most of those guys. So it's got to be kind of funny, but he did just finish up his second season being a full-time NHLer. So he's still developing a little bit in his own right. And I do think we saw that on display here this season from Alex Vlasic. And I think a lot of the things going on with the Blackhawks caught up with him a little bit, in my opinion, and I don't think we saw the overall consistency from start to finish like we did last year in his rookie campaign, or at least maybe the ideal type of leap from Vlasic, cementing himself as the future number one based on how well he fared as a rookie. Make no mistake about it. Listen, it was a really strong season for Vlasic, and as I'll go through in the numbers, he set new career highs all across the board, right? But I do think on the defensive side of things, he was probably involved in too many goals against, goals for the opponent, playing an integral role in that than even he would like to admit. And I think that was kind of on display in some of the numbers that we'll get into here in just a moment. But at the same point in time, like all the stuff that I outlined for Connor Bedard in my first season recap, there's a lot that goes into Alex Vlasic, I think, kind of having a difficulty in taking that next step in his career. First and foremost, still only 23 years old, still a young man, again, in his second NHL season, but he also had to go through a head coaching change on the fly for the first time, also had to suffer a ton of losing again this season, which definitely wears on these guys. Also, there was the Seth Jones stuff. He winds up getting traded. Vlasic never really had a consistent D partner, and even when it was Jones, prior to him getting traded, he wasn't playing all that consistently in the weeks leading up. And then once Jones does get traded, Vlasic has to take on more of an opportunity, more of a role, has to go out there and play on the power play a little bit more frequently. And then also late in the season when Sam Rinzel comes onto the scene for those final handful of games, that's playing alongside a guy he's never played with before, because Rinzel, being in college hockey, he wasn't able to take part in Blackhawks training camps, and development camp have been all off ice these last few years. So establishing that chemistry with one another, really establishing chemistry with this blue line as a whole, I think something we have to keep in mind for Alex Vlasic in his sophomore campaign. But still a really sound year for Vlasic on the back end in a top pairing role for the Blackhawks already. Let's go ahead and dive into the numbers here. Played in all 82 games for the Blackhawks this season, and now he did play in 76 games last year, so he's already gotten a taste of what the full NHL season grind is like, but just getting even more experience, another opportunity to go through that in the peaks and valleys that come with an NHL season, right? It's just good to have for him moving forward. And in those 82 games, like I mentioned, career highs all across the board for Vlasic in goals, assists, and points. 4 goals this year, had 2 in 76 games the year prior, went up from 14 assists to 26 here this season, and wound up with 30 points, nearly doubling his previous career high. But while I mentioned a moment ago, he was a little bit involved too much in goals against for the opposing team, it wasn't like, now there were times obviously he was out there and goals against aren't particularly your fault, but there were too many times, I think, altogether where that happened to Vlasic this year, where he was a huge part in goals happening against. Again, it happened to every Blackhawks defenseman. I'm not trying to just go and single this guy out, but I think we saw that on display in the plus-minus category this season. And I know plus-minus is not the most meaningful metric to determine how someone's been playing, but year by year, when Vlasic was a -4 for the Blackhawks last year, and as I'll talk about in just a moment, the analytics, he was on the ice for 54 goals for to 58 against at even strength last year. This season did not fare nearly as well. 69 goals for, so he did help out more offensively, but 96 goals against at even strength in 82 games. And I also think that was reflected in this plus-minus rating, -23 plus-minus. Still, I think there are some things Alex Vlasic has to clean up a little bit on the defensive side of things. But I also think all those things that I outlined just a moment ago definitely played a part in him struggling a little bit more on the defensive side of the game here this year. As far as penalty minutes go, 12 penalty minutes only for Vlasic in 82 games. For him to only take 6 penalties in 82 games is pretty incredible. But at the same point in time, this can kind of be a double-sided coin here, Blackhawks fans, at least in my opinion, right? Because as a 6'6" defenseman who spends a lot of time in defensive situations, battling along the boards, right? It's a little fishy that Vlasic only took 6 penalties in 82 games. And I do like him having that discipline, right? Like, I'm not going to knock him for that. And I never want a guy to be taking penalties, but when I dive into the strengths and weaknesses of Vlasic here in just a second, one of those weaknesses is that he needs to get a little bit more rugged. He needs to add a bit of a mean streak to his game and force opposing players to be a little bit more scared or timid, or at least think twice about going into those dirty areas when they see the big 6'7" Alex Vlasic occupying that space already. I do think that is something for him to work on. As far as his even strength versus power play splits this year, 3 of his 4 goals were scored at even strength. Did score the first power play goal of his career. And ultimately, I like to see Vlasic handle an increased role on the power play after Jones got traded and before Rinzel and Levshinov showed up. I love to see him handle that opportunity pretty well. 12 of his 26 assists on the year came on the man advantage, and also, like I said, added that 1 power play goal. I don't think that's ever going to be a role Vlasic is going to have long term, but it's just, again, like we saw for him in his lone season with the Rockford Ice Hogs, it's about building his confidence and giving him more, allowing him to be more comfortable in those puck moving types of settings. I really think that's going to bode well for him moving forward when he kind of ties things together in his game. As far as the shooting percentage goes, though, this is one thing where Vlasic needs to work. 3.9 shooting percentage on the season, 2.8% last year. Well, it's not like irregular for a defenseman. I do think ultimately he needs to work on getting more shots on net and adding some more power to both his wrist shot and his slap shot as well. 23 minutes and 16 seconds of time on ice. New career high for Vlasic, like I mentioned. Took on a larger role than ever, and for being only a 23-year-old to average that much time on ice and look relatively comfortable doing it is very, very impressive stuff. 157 block shots, up from 148 the year prior. 59 hits, up from 56 the year before, but nothing really noteworthy there. One stat that is noteworthy to note here, and it's not really a good one for Vlasic, he had 47 giveaways in his rookie season the year prior, and these stats are always a little bit wonky. They're kind of like hits because they also can be a judgment stat based on the stat keeper that night. But Vlasic had 97 giveaways in 82 games this season. Like, make no mistake about it, that is way too big of a leap than we'd like to see. So there are some things. While I do believe Vlasic, for the most part, does a good job of getting the puck out of the defensive zone, and his first pass is usually good more times than not, there are still clearly some things that he needs to clean up in his transition game. I also, though, wonder if that could just be a symptom of him having to carry the puck up the ice a little bit more frequently, considering Seth Jones was out of the mix. But as far as Vlasic's strengths and weaknesses, kind of getting to the part of this segment where we talk about what we've learned about Alex Vlasic through these first 2 years, his biggest strength undoubtedly is the size and the reach that he has. He's just such a problem for opposing puck carriers. He knows how to separate them from the puck really well and just doesn't give them a lot of room to work with out there on the ice. And in those one-on-one battles, he's so good at just making those little plays to get the puck over to his teammate to help get them going the other direction with some speed. Definitely a strength of Alex Vlasic's, that big body, that long reach of his. And he also pairs that with a very active stick in transition, right? Like I mentioned, doesn't give opposing puck carriers a lot of room to work with, separates players from their ideal shooting angles like that they want to go on when they enter the offensive zone. Altogether, he's just a huge hindrance for players that are coming down his direction with speed. And also, one part of Vlasic's game that I'm pretty pleasantly surprised has become a strength of his is the skating department. I don't think he's ever going to be like a Cale Makar level skater back there, but we saw the numbers. Vlasic's top level speed is about as good as anyone's in this league with those long and powerful strides of his. And that just allows him to have a little bit more upside in his game, especially when the Blackhawks roster as a whole starts to get a little bit better too. But really, it's just about the size, the fit, the reach, knowing how to separate players from the puck, and then using that long reach of his and his heads-up vision in order to get pucks out of the defensive zone. I think he does a really good job of utilizing the glass. Then also his first pass, like I mentioned, more times than not, I truly believe is a strength of his. As far as what Vlasic needs to work on moving forward, number one is that he just needs to get a little bit meaner and keep getting stronger to make himself a more affordable presence out there on the ice. He cannot give an inch out there. He's just got to become a little bit more of a hard ass. And I think that is going to take a little bit more time. And I don't ever expect him to be someone who's like dropping the gloves consistently or laying those big booming hits. But he's got to, be a little bit more physical as a 6'6", 6'7" defenseman out there and be a little bit sturdier along the crease and play just a little bit tougher in that mold of his. Also, he definitely needs to keep developing that shot and get it on net more frequently. I've been pretty disappointed with Vlasic's shots so far in the NHL. How many 6'6", 6'7" defensemen do you see without a booming shot back there? And that just hasn't been on display for Vlasic. So adding power to both his wrister and his slap shot will bode well for him moving forward and ultimately getting better at getting pucks towards the net. He's not the only one on the Blackhawks that needs to work on this, by the way, but even just like getting pucks banking towards the net and getting it on cage a little bit more frequently, definitely something that'll help Vlasic take his game to the next level. Also, I think his cycling in the offensive zone has a little bit of a ways to go as well. But with his skating upside, I think he's more capable than what we've seen so far in wheeling around the offensive zone, pinching in the right spots, keeping plays alive at the blue line. And I think that is something that goes along with experience, but there is a little ways for him to go in the cycling in the offensive zone category as well. But as far as what Alex Vlasic's upside is, based on what we've seen from him this season and his first 2 years in the NHL with the Blackhawks, I think undoubtedly he's going to be a top 4 defenseman in this league. He's already that as a 23-year-old, basically, and he certainly has the potential to be a top pairing guy who's capable of handling 23 to 26 minutes per game, trusted in all defensive-minded situations, a staple of the penalty kill. What's going to truly determine his upside and how much of a top 4, top pairing guy he is how well he develops that physicality of his, how much more stronger he gets in, how he can continue to develop all of those skills and put it together in the offensive zone and make himself a little bit more serviceable in that category. That's what's really going to determine the ceiling on a player like Alex Vlasic. But the floor, like I said, he's already kind of there as a top 4 defenseman, and I really believe he's going to be a top pairing staple for a long time for this Blackhawk squad. Someone who's probably wearing a letter on his sweater as well. Would not be surprised whatsoever. Been here basically since day one of this rebuild. And while it wasn't as consistent of a sophomore season as, again, maybe we would have liked to see or maybe we expected to see out of Alex Vlasic based on how well he fared as a rookie, like Connor Bedard, there's still no reason to be concerned about his development moving forward. He's firmly cemented as a puzzle piece in this rebuild here in Chicago. As far as what grade I'm going to give Alex Vlasic, I'm going to give him a flat B, just like I did for Connor Bedard. And I really think there's situations, while they're obviously 2 different positions, I think their seasons were quite similar. Second year in the NHL as a full-time NHLer for both of them. Had really strong seasons last year. Maybe didn't take the steps that we wanted to see this season, but by no means had a discouraging season whatsoever and put together some really good numbers. And there was also a lot of things that they had to battle through as young players. And once this Blackhawks roster starts get a little bit better, and once the young players around them start to get more experience, I have no doubt that they're both going to shine and elevate their game more and more and more. And I expect, like I said, Alex Vlasic to be a top pairing defenseman for the Chicago Blackhawks for a long, long time. I'm giving him a flat B for his performance here this season. Let me know in the comment section if you feel the same way, if you think that grade's too high, too low, and also let me know who you want to see me cover tomorrow in my next Blackhawks season recaps. But that's going to take care of Alex Vlasic's 24-25 season recap. Coming up in just a moment here, Blackhawks fans, before I wrap up today's episode, still got to get into my weekly Mailbag Monday fan segment. Real quick, though, I do got to talk to you all about the fine folks over at FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are underway, and FanDuel is giving new customers an incredible way to get in on the action. Right now, when you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you'll get awarded with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. And that's $250 that you can use to bet on everything from buzzer beaters to early round upsets and even who's lifting the trophy when it's all said and done. Plus, after the game tips off, you can still combine live prop bets into a same game parlay for a chance to win real big. So don't miss out on this incredible offer. Again, $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. All you got to do is head on over to FanDuel.com and claim your $250 worth of bonus bets today. Back here on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, thank you all again for making the show your very first listen, here to start off your day. For your second listen, make sure to go and check out the new Locked On NHL Game Night. Every game, every night, right up until a Stanley Cup champion is crowned, you can get local analysis on a national scale with the coverage you love from Locked On. And you can now find Locked On NHL Game Night on YouTube or wherever you may be listening to your podcasts. Segment 3, before I close out today's episode, of course, still got to get into Mailbag Monday. And if you're watching this right now and have a Blackhawks related question that you want to ask, hit me up down below in the comment section. Or if you're someone who's tuning in and listening through an audio platform, can also reach out on any one of my social media platforms or even email lockedonblackhawks@gmail.com. First question I want to answer today comes from Darren Wilcox 4683, who asked, Jack, I had a dream the other night the Hawks give up Korchinski, a 2026 first unprotected, and a second for Elias Pettersson. In your opinion, is that a dream or a nightmare? I don't think taking on Elias Pettersson and his contract is a nightmare, even with the consistency issues. I think he only tallied 45 points in like 64 games this season after having at least 89 in the 2 years prior. I don't hate taking that risk because the Blackhawks need to get to the salary cap floor, and they also need offensive playmakers, and Elias Pettersson is certainly a step up from what Connor Bedard has had in his first 2 NHL campaigns. My nightmare part of this deal, Darren, would be the unprotected 2026 first round pick, because that's, of course, the Gavin McKenna draft. And while it would be nice for the Blackhawks to get out of the bottom 3 of the NHL standings once again, I don't really think they're going to be taking a massive leap. They're probably still going to be involved in the draft lottery, if I had to guess right here, right now. And they probably don't hate that, because that still gives them an opportunity to land Gavin McKenna, who could be the next superstar in this league. And trading away a 2026 unprotected first when there's a lot of unknowns about what this Blackhawks team is going to look like next season, that's where the risk is. I do think if the Blackhawks wanted to make a run at Elias Pettersson, Kevin Korchinski in a second, those 2 parts of the trade make sense. Korchinski played his junior hockey in Western Canada, British Columbia guy, played for the Vancouver Giants, right? So trading him out there would make a lot of sense. It's just about figuring out what that main puzzle piece would be. And for it to be a 2026 unprotected first, I think that's a little bit too much for the Blackhawks to give up. I don't think they'd want to give up an unprotected 2026 first. And I also do wonder, just with all what's going on with the Vancouver Canucks, right? Quinn Hughes maybe doesn't want to be there long-term. Not sure if Rick Tocchet is going to be their head coach. Not sure what's happening with Elias Pettersson. There's a lot that they're dealing with right now. And to get out of an Elias Pettersson contract, while I don't think they want to do that as badly now, considering JT Miller was the one they elected to trade at the midway point of the season, they're probably not as inclined now to trade Elias Pettersson. But if they do, they probably would still have to sell him for pennies on the dollar because of his contract and because of his inconsistencies. And I wouldn't hate that as a Chicago Blackhawks fan personally, as much as some others probably would. But the real nightmarish part of this deal to me, Darren, is involving a 2026 unprotected first round pick. The Blackhawks, I don't think, can do that. Next question comes from Andy Allen 4357, who actually has a 2-parter. The first one is, CHR did an interesting poll on Demidov versus Celebrini after our game against Montreal. I'm a fan of Celebrini and try to watch the Sharks when I can, seeing them as our natural Western Conference rivals in the future. I'm also a bit tired of the onslaught of Demi-love, so I fall in Team Macklin. Where do you lie? Yeah, I'm definitely Team Macklin as well. He's just the more complete player than Ivan Demidov is. And while Demidov probably has the higher offensive ceiling, Macklin's going to put up numbers in this league in his own right. And he's already doing grown man things at a young age defensively. Like that, I really think he could be a Jonathan Taves type of comp over there for San Jose. Demidov has all the upside in the world, but give me Macklin if I want my top line center playing big boy hockey. Next question from Andy is, would you be for or against bringing back Patrick Kane as an Obi-Wan Kenobi to our young Jedi? Bringing Kane back for this upcoming history-making season for both the Hawks and number 88 himself. I really believe that ship has sailed, mostly because why would Patrick Kane come back? I'm sure there is the allure of Chicago, but at this stage of his career, he wants to be winning Stanley Cups. He wants to play playoff hockey, and he hasn't sniffed that in a long time, and his clock is ticking. Blackhawks aren't going to be trying to win a Stanley Cup next year. Just doesn't make a lot of sense for me. I don't think it would make a lot of sense for the Blackhawks. I think that's just kind of added attention to the situation that they don't want to really deal with. Hope I'm not spoiling your party here, Andy, but I don't think that's happening whatsoever. Next question comes from DParis2172, who asked, question for Mailbag Monday. What are your thoughts on experimenting with Kevin Korchinski as a forward? With the team's increasingly crowded defensive core and KK's skill set, I see a potential spot for him as a defensive-minded bottom six forward in the future. I don't think this is a horrible idea considering just how deep the Blackhawks blue line is, especially on the left-hand side. But it would be very hard, I'm sure, to get Kevin Korchinski to sign up to a position change at this stage of his career. And while we did see this happen a lot in the, 10, 15 years ago in the NHL, just with the game being more based around skill and speed, more so than ever, it's harder for guys to make that type of transition and thrive and be able to get away with it. When the game was about physicality and size a decade and a half ago, yeah, guys could get away with it a little bit more, but you just don't see that happen as often today in the modern day NHL. I don't think it's the worst idea in the world though, right? Like KK has great wheels, struggles in the defensive zone because of his lack of size. I don't know if he'd be a defensive minded bottom six forward, maybe a speedster on the PK or something like that, but I don't think this is going to be happening with Kevin Korchinski. He would probably, I'd assume, much rather get traded to keep playing on as a defenseman where he's played his whole career than make a position change at this point in time. But again, not the craziest idea I've ever heard in the world. Last question comes from William Sacconi 6166, who asked, though hitting on all three of these are going to be important, rank the following on most important to least important this offseason: nailing the coaching hire, the draft, and free agency. Put me in a real pickle here, William, because all three of those things very crucial for the Blackhawks. I'd probably say free agency, again, while it is important, is probably last because Connor Bedard absolutely needs help. That's for sure. But if the Blackhawks only make one top six addition in free agency and do nothing else, I think they could be able to get away with it more so than them like fumbling the draft or the coaching hire. I'm going to put the coaching hire at number one ahead of the draft. The only reason I'm going to do so right now is because at this point, I'm hoping the Blackhawks either have number one or another number two, and that makes their decision but down to basically two guys in this year's draft class, right? So it makes their decision not as difficult. So that's why I'd put the coaching hire at number one. I'd go draft at number two, free agency at three. But as you outlined, William, all of them going to be very important for the Blackhawks this summer to help them take that next step and head in the right direction. But that's going to take care of today's episode of Locked On Blackhawks, everyone. As always, thank you all again for joining me on the show. Be sure to subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube. Follow Locked On Blackhawks for free right now, wherever you may be listening to your podcasts. That way, you can get the latest episode as soon as it becomes available each and every day. I'm your host, Jack Bushman. Find me on X at Jack Bushman 2, and make sure to check out my Strictly Blackhawks account at Talkin' Hockey for all the latest Blackhawks news and updates. Till tomorrow's episode, everyone, enjoy the rest of your Mondays. I'll see you next time on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.